Good evening, everyone. We're thrilled to welcome you for the launch of the second edition of our Women for Change initiative. The whole team is behind the camera. We're very excited. As you might know, we were supposed to do this in London at the Barbican Centre, but with the recent news and the new restrictions in the UK, we decided to make it a fully digital event. You know us, we want this event to be inspiring, to be challenging, to be stimulating and make you want to take action. But most of all, what we want is for you to be safe and healthy. So here we are. Tonight's theme is pretty special. The last few years have been very intense. Whether we are referring to the health crisis that has been paralyzing us for the last 2 years, or the climate crisis that is growing and affecting more and more people unequally, or to the global economical and political crisis that are deepening the inequalities across the globe. So we want to explore this topic that is being talked about more and more, and to bring the ChangeNOW touch to it. Women on the front line of crisis. Well, if you know us, you know that at ChangeNOW, we love positive, powerful, and unifying words, because that's what we do. We think about actions, we think about solutions. That's how we want to see the world. But the reality is, there are no other words for war, violence, or crisis. So tonight, we will take some more time to explore a subject that requires a great deal of attention and, most of all, understanding from everyone. And I'm talking here about the impacts that crises of any kind have on women, be it political, social, climatic, health, all crises. It is our responsibility as citizens of the world to understand the inequalities that exist, to actually hope to change the world. So tonight we will welcome women from around the world, women who are on the front lines and women supporting, helping those on the front lines. Women carrying the torch of freedom and love in places where darkness seems to take over. To get started, I would like to give the floor to a woman I greatly admire. She's inspiring. I greatly admire for her wisdom, knowledge, and commitment on women's rights. She is the founding president of the Global Fund for Women, and she teaches social justice and women's health issues at Stanford University. In 2005, she was nominated as one of a group of women for the Nobel Peace Prize. Please welcome Firth.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present some thoughts on the situation of women worldwide. I have 10 minutes, so I will speak rather quickly. First, to offer some thoughts about why it is important to concentrate on women, highlighting some data about the current situation of women, and commenting on women's rights as human rights. The situation of women in comparison with men has been and is concerning. To provide a few examples, here are some recent data from the United Nations about women and girls. In poorer countries where 3/4 of the world's people live, women are the fuel collectors and the food producers, and yet they lack training to make maximum use of resources. Women worldwide within the family provide more healthcare than all official health professionals combined, and yet they suffer disproportionately from preventable illnesses and injuries related to poor nutrition, lack of basic education, and lack of access to primary health care. In developing countries, 2/3 of women over the age of 25 have never been to school. 130 million more adult women than men cannot read or write. Data from 68 countries indicates that a woman's education is a key factor in determining children's survival. Globally, over 750 million women and girls alive today were married before the age of 18. Sex-selective abortion is widespread as parents decide that they cannot bring another girl into the world. Thousands of girls have disappeared, unbalancing sex ratios in countries like China, Korea, and India. More than 500,000 women die each year from almost completely preventable childbirth-related injuries and illnesses. 1/4 to 1/2 of women worldwide suffer violence at the hands of an intimate partner. 1 in 5 women and girls aged 15 to 49 reported experiencing physical and/or sexual violence by an intimate partner. 3 out of 4 fatalities of war are women and children. Gender inequality is a major cause and effect of hunger and poverty. It is estimated that 60% of chronically hungry people are women and girls. There is a large gender gap in women's access to leadership. Women make up fewer elected representatives in most rural areas and most urban areas. And I haven't even mentioned issues such as bride burning, genital mutilation, pay inequity, and invasion of privacy. These discrepancies are both unfair and wasteful, and I could go on and on. If you are interested in this kind of information from the United Nations, the information is extensive and very interesting and as accurate as we can get at the moment from the United Nations and from WHO, the World Health Organization. Despite the violence and harshness that women may experience, however, they continue to prevail, nurturing children, producing food, initiating environmental programs, organizing social movements, assuming leadership positions. In country after country, we see wonderful examples of women in the face of immense obstacles, overcoming adversity, and creating new organizations and programs to effect positive change. In other words, it is important, both necessary and perhaps inevitable, that we focus on and support women. When I entered the field of international women's health, my perspective was basically economic and social, in that I saw women both as deserving recipients of assistance and necessary agents of change. Greater involvement with the issues, however, brought me to the view that I had been looking primarily at symptoms rather than the root causes, that we have to deal with basic inequalities in society if we are to effect true change, and that it is not just impractical and unfair, but dangerous to demean 51% of the world's population. Our time has been described as a low point of cultural development that has led us into the deadlock of scientific materialism, technological destructiveness, religious nihilism, and spiritual impoverishment. In this kind of a time, in such a time, it is argued, it is both necessary and inevitable that certain values commonly perceived as feminine receive much greater prominence. This is happening as we observe that both women and men put into practice such values as nurturing the earth, respecting the cycles of the earth, expressing a love and concern for the generations that follow, and emphasizing kindness, compassion, and love. I equate feminist values with basic human rights, thinking in terms of female human or women's human rights rather than the older term of women in development, seems to me to lead us to the reality of the experiences of individual women as unique human beings. It encourages us to focus on such fundamental human rights as integrity of the body, freedom from abuse and violation of the body, and reproductive freedom. Female human rights also encompass equal rights to matters of property, custody, marriage, and divorce. Thinking in terms of women's rights strengthens women to confront problems at each level, recognizing that women's rights embrace survival issues and also insist that women are full citizens, having equal standing with men in all forums. In short, a human rights lens highlights the idea that each woman individually can be seen and can see herself as a strong and independent citizen of the world. Human rights are dreams of what we hope the world could be. They are not rules that people must obey. When we think of the extreme problems that plague women around the world, what can be done? What I'm about to say may seem rather unrealistic, but I truly believe that we have the power to make positive change. Each of us individually must find the strength within us to support other women who take risks to run for office, to take leadership, to follow unusual paths for change. We need to find friends who will stick with us as we take risks to lead and express our own dreams and ideas for change. We need to step up against misogyny, discrimination, and cruel patriarchy. We need to work at whatever level makes sense, perhaps at a community level especially, where change can be recognized directly. We must respect each other wholeheartedly and respect and acknowledge the men who support the rights of women and other downtrodden people. In other words, I am proposing that we work hard to develop our strengths and our courage. Let us speak up when we observe cruelty or discrimination. This is probably easy for me to say because I am quite old and most of my life is behind me. So I'm not risking my job or my standing in the world by taking a courageous stand against power. But I observe that many young people are beginning to stand up to malevolent power, and I do my best to support them. My advice for the future is for women to respect each other deeply and widely and stand by each other, especially when we or our women friends are attempting to ensure that feminist values, which I consider basic human rights, will prevail in the future. Thank you very much.
With this first panel, we will explore how conflicts and situations of instability exacerbate pre-existing patterns of discrimination against women and girls, exposing them to heightened risk of violations of their human rights. Today, I'm very honored to explore the work of incredible women addressing human rights, effects of displacements, and women participation in peace building and recovery. First, with a pre-recorded testimonial of Zarifa Ghavari. She is an Afghan politician and mayor of the city of Maidanshar since March 2019. We will follow after that with a discussion with Rossella Paliukilor, UNHCR's representative for the UK, and also joining us from London, as well as Mashharawi, CEO of Sunbox Group Limited, joining us from New York. But let's start with the moving testimonial of Zarifa Ghavari. Zarifa is, again, an Afghan politician and mayor of Maidanshar, and she was the youngest mayor appointed at just 26. Let's watch her story.
Ghafari, and until 2 months ago, I served my homeland, Afghanistan, in public office, like thousands of Afghan women who are educated, women who want to and dare to make a difference, women who contribute to make the future of all Afghans, women, men, and children a little better every day. I love to challenge the challenges. Let's fight.
Tonight, we're joined by two incredible women to have a discussion on this first panel. First, by Rossella Paliukilor. She is the UNHCR representative for the UK. She is in her post as UNHCR representative for the UK since December 2018. Prior, she had served as Director for External Relations at UNHCR headquarters in Geneva. She has over 30 years of experience in refugee and humanitarian crisis. She has served at UNHCR in diverse countries contexts, including Pakistan, Nepal, Iraq, Kenya, Belgium, Hungary, and Italy. Ms. Pagliuchi-Lor has a master's degree in political science, international relations from the University of La Sapienza in Rome, Italy. I can also introduce the second speaker of this panel. Majd Mashharawi is the CEO of Sandbox Group Limited. She's a resident of war-torn Gaza. And Majd Mashharawi observed the acute need for access to construction material in order to rebuild damaged buildings and infrastructure. She is part of the women finding and participating to the peace building and recovery of war-torn areas. She developed Sandbox, an affordable solar system that produces energy to alleviate the effects of the energy crisis in Gaza, where access to electricity has been severely restricted, sometimes to less than 3 hours a day. In 2018, she was selected as one of the most creative people in business by Fast Company and won the MIT Pan-Arab competition. Her TED Talk has received nearly 1.6 million views so far. In September 2019, Ms. Mashharawi and Sandbox Company was awarded the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award. Most recently, Majd has scaled up her work with solar to the Gulf area. And I know you're joining us from New York this evening. This evening for us and afternoon for you.
Yes.
Great.
So thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. I have around 15 minutes, right?
Yes, you're welcome to start perhaps telling us your experience on how you went from looking at desolation and decided to bring forth something that was a solution to an extremely devastated area.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for having me part of this conference. I was so excited, especially it's focusing a lot on women and women rights and women activities worldwide. So it's a pleasure to be on this panel with also recognized names and women. So thank you. My name is Majd, and I'm a Palestinian from Gaza. I was born there. I grew up in Gaza. And what I can say is I just came from a community or a society that lacks everything. Water, access to clean water, access to energy, access to proper healthcare, high education, and most of all, freedom. And since I was a kid, I was always curious about how the world looks like outside of this small cage. When the blockade started in Gaza in 2016, I was less than 14-year-old. And I told my dad, hey, Dad, I want to see the world. And he said, just forget about this idea. Get it out of your head. This is not going to happen because we are blocked. I've never accepted this fact. And I always wanted to compare the world outside of this small cage, which is 25 miles long and 15 miles wide, and the world outside. So my curiosity drove me when I was 14 and 15-year-old to create a social campaign against the civil war that happened in Gaza. So I gathered university students, and I became to understand how my society is constructed, how the people think in such a young age. Also, my parents provided me with really great access to different languages, education, and we were living a few blocks away from the largest camp in Gaza Strip. So I was aware of how the camp life is, how the family, what kind of food the families eat, what kind of services they lack. So when I graduated from high school, I decided to be an engineer because I was looking for a faculty that combines between innovation and the practical life. And I wanted to use this faculty as a road for me to bathe different things towards my big dreams, which is why we cannot have a country what kind of a state we wanted to have, how young people and young women can participate in different challenges inside the community. So during my college, I've started a couple of companies and small startups, and I exited it. And the largest one, the biggest one, was Green Cake. Our house was partially destroyed in 2008 and 2012 wars in Ghana. I lost two of my best friends who we were celebrating their birthday one day before they passed away. And that really drove me to do different things, to take this as a challenge to change the current situation we live in. So I started the biggest company, which is Green Cake, in order to provide new kind of building blocks made out of rubble and ashes from the demolished houses inside Gaza. I had no business background. Again, I came from engineering background, but I taught myself also these skills through different online channels, YouTube videos, and different resources. With the limited resources we have in Gaza and the limited access to the outside world, I was able to rebuild for thousands of people their houses. And I came up with this patentable idea. I was the first woman who ever went to factories inside Gaza to produce blocks and hire men to work for the company. It was very challenging in the beginning, and people won't accept it at all. They were like against it. Some people did not even give me the trust to do so, but I had belief in myself. I knew someday and one day this will be a step towards the outside world, and I will be able to travel outside. I've tried for almost 8 years to get outside of Gaza. I was rejected so many times. And in order to get out, you need to obtain different four permits and coordinations. I never gave up. Every year and every time I was rejected, it gave me more power and more energy to reapply again. So in 2017, I managed for the first time to get outside of the smallest strip, the largest open air prison. And I went through United Nations Refugee and Working Agency to Japan to refine my product. I will never forget the feeling that day. I felt like a bird flying out of a cage. I was so happy. I was like 22 and I could not sleep for like the 18-hour flight. I had a lot of energy. and every time I think this moment, it gives me so much hope in the future. I went back to Gaza after 2 weeks from Japan, and taking someone from Gaza to Japan was unfair in so many different aspects. Because, coming from a society that has nothing to a place that has light, technology, people, finance, entrepreneurship world. And again, like this did not get me down. I was like, we should be like this country and other countries outside one day. It was my first time to see bridges, different cars, people who don't speak English, people who don't speak Arabic, people are not from my own religion. They don't dress up like me. And they are different, okay? So that year really flipped my life, and I decided to study business. And this is how I managed to get to the United States in 2017 into a fellowship in Boston. And I started my business life from that moment. So yeah, that's it.
In awe of all you've managed to accomplish and how you participate every day to peace building and recovery. You're a phoenix.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Rossella, I know you're here and I know you have such an incredible knowledge of the situation of human rights, of women's rights, but also of the global perspective that it represents today for all of us. Perhaps you can tell us how and how you're working every day and what you're trying to build towards more fair and more fair rights for women, but also more equality.
Thank you very much, Nora. It's great to be here, and I'm really impressed by what I heard from Majd. I think it also reflection, quite frankly, about how undeservedly privileged I've been in having granted to me what Majd has had to fight so hard for. First of all, the freedom to go around. I mean, you're really an inspiration, Majd. What do we do? I work for the Refugee Agency. So what we do is trying to ensure that refugees of whatever gender, of course, have access to the rights that, first of all, the right to seek asylum for persecution. And of course, many of the refugees are women indeed. And displacement for women, as well as persecution for women, has a somewhat different twist, which for many years was actually not fully recognized. I think for many years the sense was that a refugee tended to be a man because men were associated with political expression. It's a relatively new development. Let's say, the few maybe 15, 20 years that there's been an increasing understanding of the fact that persecution targets women differently, but not less seriously, and very often more so. I think we've seen it particularly now with the situation in which so many refugees are actually fleeing from war, and war is very often a war against women. War which sees the incredible levels of violence against women, and in an area in aspects that very often turn them from having been victims of violence, they end up being also ostracized by their communities. I think it's when you're talking about, for example, sexual and gender violence, it's one of those few crimes in which very often it's the victim and not the perpetrator who is blamed by communities. But women, of course, are particularly in jeopardy also when during the flight, when they are, of course, more vulnerable to attacks and exploitation, but also when they arrive in a country of asylum. And this is true, actually, sometimes even when you're talking about women who find asylum in developed countries such as the UK, where women often have less access to services and less freedom than they might otherwise have, simply by reason of the fact that they may have trouble with English, where they may be stuck with many children at home and therefore unable to engage with the outside world in the same way that men are. COVID has been a particularly challenging time, well, for everyone, of course, but it has really exacted a particular toll on women. And here I would say, and of course, not just refugee women. I think we are seeing increasing levels of domestic violence inside the home as women got trapped sometimes within abusive families. And of course, because very often women have the kind of jobs that rely on personal presence. And of course, they found themselves more subject to, more likely to be without jobs and therefore without means of livelihood. But before I sound like I'd also like to recognize that the fact that we have seen over and over again that the relative vulnerability that women have in many aspects should not be equated to a general vulnerability. Women are incredibly resilient. And I think what we have seen very often, for example, in refugee camps, that at least up to maybe 10 years ago were almost the default position for the default residence for refugees. We've seen that very often women were the part of the population that was more ready to take on new challenges, new jobs, to learn new skills, to engage in the communities, at the time in which very often men felt disempowered and deprived of the role that they were expecting to see recognized to them in society. So women have really fought very hard to keep families together and to find new ways of holding the community together. So I'd like to say that while there is undoubtedly a societal setup that means that women are more often at the receiving end of limitations and mistreatment and discrimination, etc. There is also, at the other hand, a spirit, a combative spirit, and an ability to adapt and to grow that really does make the difference for societies. And I'd like to conclude just to say that this is something that the humanitarian sector has recognized. I mean, I remember when we were talking about women in terms of vulnerability alone, and now we're talking about women in terms of capacities and resilience. And how we have moved, really the discourse has really moved now towards not just education, which is of course the key empowerment tool of empowerment for kids, but also sport. Sport is incredibly empowering for young girls. Is a way to give them the sort of confidence, a sense of freedom from the limitations that many societies impose on them. Takes them out of the kind of enforced invisibility that in some societies girls are expected to have. So there is really, and of course, the question of leadership and empowerment. There are many projects and programs, a great deal of attention in trying to give girls a space to grow and to become what they want to be. And this I think is an incredible change that's taken over, that has really taken over the humanitarian community, and that I think will bring fruits not only as they are in exile, but also when they go back home.
Honored again to hear you both speak. It's such an inspiring testimonial from both of you. You know, backstage there's a lot of women. We are speaking of women. We're speaking of the contribution of women. Perhaps you could tell us what would be, both of you, in closing, the word of advice that you could give to a young little girl just going about her day, dreaming about the future. Perhaps, Rossella, you could start. Again, as I said, there's a lot of women backstage, young women backstage working. There's a lot of women right now hoping for their future. And if you had one word of advice, both of you, Majd and Rossella, starting with you in closing.
Well, I would say, listen to Majd and to Zarifa. I think, you can't have a better example of women who have defied all odds. And these are very important odds. The man with the sticks and stones waiting for her outside outside the office of the mayoral office, or Majd challenge in being accepted as a credible entrepreneur because she's a woman. I mean, the world is full of incredible examples of very, very, very brave women who have managed to win all odds, to become something, to make something of themselves that societies was not ready to recognize. So I would say just follow them. There is really a great deal to learn from them.
Thank you, Rossella. How about you, Majd?
Oh, thank you, Rossella. Thank you for the amount of encouragement you've given me and for the work you are doing, actually. I just want to, before the closing, I want to follow up with the 2 points you mentioned, Rossella. The first one about access to opportunities for women. So in 2017, when I had the access to come to the United States and start my second company, which was a solar company, it came out of pain. So when I came here to the United States, I felt that I'm responsible for my society and I have to present. And this is what most of the women do. So women always feel dedicated to their societies more than men. This is also from my work experience. Plus, if they put their head in something, they will definitely do it. I always say, if you want to create a nation, just educate one woman, and then that's it. Leave the rest to her. So when I started my second company, the Sandbox company, it came out of pain. I spent 5 years of college studying on a candle. I've witnessed hundreds of people lose their kids because of candles. And they burned, the kids were killed, they died, and the mom and the father, and so many houses, they were lost because of the fire. So when I decided to start this company, I said, this is going to be a hard journey. Creating products in China, shipping it all the way to Gaza and to the West Bank is a crazy process. I've been in meetings with military officials in the Israeli side, governmental officials in the Palestinian side, trying to get my products across the border in the age of 23. So for me as a woman to present in front of these officials was a hard process. I've been through crazy interrogations, investigations with the KOGAD, the IDF in the Israeli side, the government in the Palestinian side, asking me, why you do this? Why do you want to do it? It makes no sense to us. So I was the first woman in this field in my country who paved the road to so many other women in 2017. So now we've been operating for 4 years. We've done thousands of families. We've given them solar energy. We've worked on the desalination plants funded by the European Union. We work with embassies providing handicapped children with solar technologies. So far, we created an impact for 68,000 people in Gaza Strip. More than 35,000 people in Gaza are having clean water powered by our solar systems. Our company started from 3 people. Now we hire 15 people in Palestine, 4 people in Saudi, and 2 people in the UAE. So this kind of impact, if you need someone who's dedicated for it. And that became an example for so many women in the Gaza Strip, I would say even in Palestine and in the Arab country, that women, if they wanted to do something, if they believe in it, they would do it. For me, my company, some boxes like having a baby to grow it up. There is nothing more precious to a woman than her baby, her kid. Okay, so for me, this company was my kid that I put all the energy I have just to put it in. So when Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Award was awarded to me, I said, well, that was not my goal to get awards and to be recognized worldwide. I just wanted to create the local impact, and I knew that this is going to be a stage for me to speak worldwide. And this is why I'm here today in this conference. I don't think I'm here today because of me, Majd, but because of the impact we've created on the ground. So what I wanted to tell so many women around the world, if you want to be heard, if you want the people to listen to your story, you have to create the impact in your local community. You have to see where the pain is. What is your personal pain as a woman living in a men-dominant society? What is your pain as like someone who wants to create a change on the ground against all the odds? Like such a society like Gaza where you have access to nothing, plus you're a woman. So it's like a crazy thing to do. But now look at me. Like I don't even have like a state. We don't have a country. We are occupied. I don't have a passport. I have like a travel document. And I went to 25 countries. And here today I'm speaking from New York City. So if you tell someone in Gaza 5 years ago, Majd is gonna be in New York City in a few years, I was like, this is crazy, okay? So now I'm traveling all around the world, expanding the message, delivering the stories of so many women in Gaza. And once you are successful, once the world can hear you, don't forget about other women behind you who's also in need for their stories to be told. So also big part of what I'm doing in my society now is advocating for women, sponsoring a lot of women, small startups, getting women outside of Gaza for medication, for education, for so many different things that they are in need of. And just believe in yourself. So I have like strong belief in myself from day one. I knew I'm gonna make it. And I know that Sandbox in like coming few years is gonna be one of the biggest regional companies in solar industry.
Great. Thank you, Majd. Thank you, Rossella. I feel so pumped. I'm sure everyone in the audience is feeling pumped too. Thank you so much for being part of this first panel. So inspiring.
Thank you so
very much, Nora.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
For the second panel, we will continue to be incredibly inspired, but also we'll continue to address the situation of women from a different perspective in a different context. Women in the front line of crisis are very loaded project to discuss, but we're very well surrounded and we have incredible speakers this evening. We will continue with yet another inspiring pre-recorded testimonial from Veronica in Munda, an indigenous activist and regional leader of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, Confinia. ChangeNOW is rooted in action, as we know, but it's also very important for ChangeNOW to hear the voices of indigenous people. This is something that is very important to the team, to the founder, and it is very important in this time of our history. Veronica in Munda, again, is the leader of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, Confinia. She was born, the project was born from the community, specifically the community of Villano Pastaza. She is involved in the youth inspiring movement, and in 2017, she co-founded the Pastaza Pachakutik Youth. She was a member of the community board and representative of the OPIP organization, currently known as Pakiru. Her participation led her to join CONAIE, as Secretary of the National Organization. She is currently the regional leader of the Federation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador. From this platform, she has been developing youth-strengthening activities in the territories with the participation and support of grassroots organizations that make up the 11 nations and 23 organizations of this region. And her tagline or mantra is "a word given, a promise fulfilled." We will start with this video, a pre-recorded video of Veronica and Munda.
Mujer quichua de la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Soy activista. Nosotros desde los territorios somos quienes estamos protegiendo nuestra vida. Para nosotros hablar de conservación es hablar de nuestra vida, de nuestros territorios, de nuestra forma de vivir en cada uno de ellos, y sobre todo es disfrutar de nuestra cosmovisión. Nosotros acá en Ecuador somos 11 nacionalidades y 23 organizaciones donde todos los hombres, mujeres, estamos en pie de lucha. Sobre todo las mujeres, quienes estamos al frente, somos las que más padecemos, porque nosotros somos quienes estamos en los territorios haciendo escuchar nuestras voces, porque nuestras voces no son escuchadas. Queremos que nuestras voces se escuchen a nivel nacional e internacional. Y sobre todo queremos que haya un cambio de conciencia a nivel internacional, a las grandes empresas, quienes están financiando en los territorios, a las petroleras, mineras, quienes están destruyendo nuestra vida de nuestra fauna, nuestra vida de nuestros animales, la vida de los ríos, que son fuente de vida. El río, el aire, somos quienes estamos acá, y también somos quienes generamos oxígeno al mundo. Por eso exigimos desde nuestros territorios respeto hacia la vida humana, respeto hacia los territorios, que son cuencas de territorios sagrados. Para nosotros todo es sagrado, la palabra es sagrada, y por eso como jóvenes, como mujeres, estamos en primera línea exigiendo que nos respeten y sobre todo que nos dejen a nuestros territorios vivir como nosotros queremos vivir, como vivían hace 528 años nuestros ancestros. Por eso exigimos eso. Estamos nosotros en los territorios con nuestra forma de vida. Queremos nuestra educación propia. También estamos exigiendo que nuestros territorios no sean invadidos por muchas personas que vienen y sobre todo destruyen a nuestros territorios, porque al destruir nuestro territorio destruyen el agua, destruyen la vida de cada ser humano. Nosotros somos quienes estamos acá. Para nosotros fue muy importante los saberes, la medicina ancestral. Cuando pasó el COVID, nosotros fuimos quienes estuvimos en los territorios y también estuvimos con nuestra medicina natural, que es muy importante porque con ella sobrevivimos en cada uno de los territorios. Y sobre todo la medicina ancestral, nuestro conocimiento ancestral, pedimos que no sean patentados, porque muchas veces son patentados nuestros conocimientos de nuestros sabios, sabias y rucos. Eso pedimos y exigimos que nos respeten en nuestro derecho, y sobre todo como quienes estamos padeciendo en los territorios, uno por el tema extractivismo minero, petrolero, el tema de hidroeléctricas, otro también por el tema de que nosotros como el ser mujeres indígenas no tenemos voces para que nos escuchen. Por eso exigimos que se nos escuchen nuestras peticiones, sobre todo los jóvenes quienes están en los territorios como guardianes de la selva. Ellos también exigen eso. Nosotros, la nueva generación, los jóvenes, los niños, quienes estamos en los territorios, en la batalla, nosotros queremos un ambiente sano, libre, y sobre todo nosotros también estamos siendo contaminados, nuestros ríos están contaminados, nuestras mujeres están muriendo con cáncer, nuestra futura generación está en peligro de perder nuestro idioma, nuestra cosmovisión, y sobre todo están en peligro nuestros animales, nuestra fauna, nuestros ríos, que el 20% de agua dulce está concentrado en las nacionalidades, en los territorios de las cuencas amazónicas. También decir que nuestros territorios están siendo invadidos, y por eso exigimos que nuestros territorios no ingresen, más bien ustedes que están allá a nivel internacional, pedir a las grandes empresas que ya no financien porque están matando a están haciendo un genocidio con las culturas y sobre todo están matando seres vivos, seres que no pueden hablar, como el agua, el aire, como los ríos, los animales, quienes están muriendo y sobre todo ellos son los que son nuestra fuente de alimento también, ¿no? En los territorios y nosotros sobrevivimos con ellos. Entonces nosotros por eso exigimos nuestros derechos, que sean respetados, también nuestra educación, nuestra propia, bilingüe, sea respetado por cada uno de los estados. En mi caso sería por el estado ecuatoriano, que nos respeten nuestra forma de vida, nuestra cosmovisión, educación, nuestra agua y sobre todo queremos que el Estado ecuatoriano o sobre todo los estados nos den una medida de protección, que como pueblos indígenas tengamos un trato muy especial, porque nosotros somos quienes damos oxígeno al mundo. Se ha comprobado que la mayoría de los árboles quienes dan este oxígeno al mundo están concentrados en los territorios de las nacionalidades.
Judikael Irakos is a feminist activist, and she is articulating her experience through with African women and overall the youth. She's a community organizer, a social entrepreneur. She has a record of advocating for children and women's rights, but also overall human rights. She has worked on different issues ranging from youth development, refugee integration, feminist organizing, community mobilizing. She's the 2019 European Commission Young Leader on Migration, the G20 Young Global Changer on Gender Equality. She's also an incredible writer. I highly recommend that you read some of her articles, very inspiring. Starting with you, Romy, perhaps you can tell us more about all the work that you do around PTSD and how you're working on a very specific topic, because when we speak of the refugee crisis, we often forget that a lot of trauma is associated with it.
Thank you, Nora. What an honor to be here with you and Judikael as well. So yeah, I am a trauma therapist, and I tell my clients that the reason I do this work is because I genuinely believe in freedom. That is, I think, a core value of mine, and I think freedom is a human right. And we need to bridge more of a gap between mental health and human rights, because I think mental health should be a human right. You're absolutely correct with I also work, so I work in trauma in many different ways. And one of the ways in which I work is with asylum seekers and with refugees. And we very rarely hear about the trauma that exists for people that are constantly on the move and that are constantly waiting. In my work with asylum seekers and refugees, a constant theme that comes up over and over and over again is waiting to get the papers, and then the papers are lost. And then waiting to get, the money for the week, and then that's lost. And that the system's constant invalidating of a person's process when they're trying to find more freedom is another way of invalidating their experience and invalidating their trauma, if that makes sense. And then I think there is something there about really honoring that in the work that I do, and doing a lot of psychoeducation with my clients on how to find internal calm in the body. When we're working with asylum seekers, the body is the most permanent home. It's our most permanent home. It's our forever home. So I do a lot of work in equipping them and empowering them to find internal calm when they are physically on the move. And fighting a system, they're constantly fighting a system that consistently continues to deny them the human right of freedom. And I think that is deeply traumatizing and wounding. And the way in which the media portrays them are, number one, the media keeps referring to them as migrants. There's a big difference between a migrant and an asylum seeker and a refugee. But there you have the power of language, and there you have, again, invalidating a person's experience, because a migrant is someone who has chosen to leave. An asylum seeker and a refugee is someone who had no other choice but to leave. So that consistent invalidation is something that I see very frequently in trauma, whether it's with asylum seekers or survivors of, domestic violence and any other forms of abuse.
How does it manifest for women? What type of circumstances do you deal with on a daily basis?
So when it comes to I currently work in two different organizations. I work at Ori, an eating disorder treatment center in London, where I'm the diversity lead and a psychotherapist. And I also work with Refugee Trauma Initiative, which is an organization which focuses on providing therapeutic services in an identity-informed way for asylum seekers. And over there, I work with men, and over here, I work with women, and in my private practice with women. And I think my experience of working with women when it comes to trauma has been the idea of caretaker, the woman who caretakes through nurture, the woman who loves too much is something that my clients bring to me a lot. Women whose bodies have experienced and witnessed a lot and continue to contain for the safety of their family and for the safety of their community. And I think something that's really important when talking about women, I want to talk about the inequities that exist when we talk about women. So I'm a Lebanese woman, which is why I do this work, because of my history as coming from, a country in the Middle East. But with women, I think I also experience a lot of women who sometimes feel like they can't take the space to speak about their own experiences because there isn't the space by society, so they don't feel like they see themselves represented enough in the books that they read. When we talk about mental health, I don't think there's enough representation of all types of women. So one of the major works that I do with the diversity lead here is that I'm really working on shifting that within the mental health system and fighting to find equal representation for all types of women, for women of color, for women that come from different faiths. So for women that, might, have some form of disability, there isn't enough representation. So the invisibility of female pain and the woman being the container and the voice being silenced, there's something here about the neck and what that part of the body carries, and allowing women to do this kind of work in therapeutic groups where they can have a community of people witness them and witness what they've experienced and validate it for them.
I love how you speak of healing the body and working with these groups of people, trying to understand the trauma that they've been through and how it expresses itself through their body. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly inspiring because it's not something that you hear often. It's not a topic that's being addressed. We very, very little speak of the unseen wounds, if I may say.
Exactly. And trauma lives in our body. It doesn't live in our head. And our body will carry these memories for us. And, I tell my clients that they are survivors. And, just like if we have a physical wound, our body will do what it needs to heal it for us. That's exactly what our body does with our emotional wounds. And sometimes for many women, the way that they have been able to heal has been, they have felt the need to be silent because they knew they weren't going to have a witness. And actually, that's what I really fight against, because I think silence is a form of oppression. So my passion is, how do we as a community create safe spaces for people where they feel like if they speak, they are going to be witnessed and validated. So whether that's with survivors, female survivors, whether that's with, male asylum seekers, female asylum seekers, that safe space for witnessing, for the body to feel safe enough to communicate, and it knows it's going to be received and it's going to be held and validated in a contained way.
Thank you so much, Romy. We're going to continue the conversation, but I want to get to you, Judikael. When we spoke yesterday, we had an incredible exchange where you explained to me how your status, your own status as a woman and as a traveler, changed over the course of your life. You first went to the United States as an immigrant and ended up being a refugee because you couldn't go back to your country. And that made me think a lot about how we can take our status for granted and how things can change in your home country so quickly that you have no place to go. Just like the famous book says, you can't go home again. Judica, you probably will say the story much better than I just try to summarize it. Perhaps you can tell us how you come about all the work that you do, and what does it mean for you to be a person moving in the world today as a woman?
Very personal, especially the work that I do with asylum seekers, refugees, and immigrants overall. It's very personal. So I migrated in the US as a personal choice. I was going to school. Then a few years later, I became an asylum seeker, then became a refugee. Then a few more years, I was in exile because I was blacklisted by my country because of my work. So those are things that quickly happened in my life. As a young woman who was finding her voice, finding how she can contribute into her communities, and that can take a toll into a person who was also navigating the racial reality of America. And now you have your own country that has its own political crisis, and you don't belong, you don't feel like you belong in the culture settings of the United States. Now you also don't have a home anymore. And how much that affects the everyday life of a person. So I started doing work with refugees out of searching my own identity as a person who felt like I don't have a home anymore. And because for me, I felt like home was a stable place. Then when I started working with refugees, it became more intense, as Romy was talking, the realization that people are living waiting, like meeting someone who has been in refugee camp for 20 years, waiting for the day UN migration will show up and get them out of the refugee camp. And to think about refugee camp, you have to understand that these are not communities involved with other communities. They put refugee camp on the border. Like the refugee camp I work in is on the border of Uganda and Tanzania. In fact, when you enter the refugee camp, there's no road. The road to the city stops, and then you enter a very crazy road, hard to drive in. That's where the refugee camps start. And you have people, young kids who were born in the refugee camp, are older now, and they don't know any other life. All they have done their entire life is to wait for that country that will decide to work with UN migration and pick them and finally give them a home. And that is not the reality that a person should live in. And that would be my reality if I was not in the States already as a student when that political crisis happened back home. So it really is personal when I do this work, because I'm hit by the reality that my life could change anytime.
Yes, it's very interesting that you bring up your own personal journey into the work that you do and how it helps you. And I think, Romy, you mentioned that as well. What I find really fascinating is that when you're exposed to the refugee crisis on a day-to-day basis, in which you experience, sometimes you become, it's business as usual. And for people that don't experience it or have never been to a refugee camp or have never spoken to a refugee, it's a foreign territory. Perhaps for the audience that's hearing us today that haven't been exposed or doesn't really understand the scope of your work, perhaps you could share one moment that has been so fundamental in the work that you do, and that you've shared in stories, perhaps trying to express what it feels like to be a refugee today. What the scope of the work that you do around the refugee crisis? Starting with you, Judica, perhaps.
So there's a story, I've talked about it, I want to share it because that particular story has been the reason why I can't stop working with refugees. Of course, the work with refugees has become trauma to me a lot because there's a lot of pain and losses that I've experienced. But in 2016, that was my first time in a refugee camp. I was documenting the sexual experiences, the sexual abuse that most women are going through when they are migrating, especially during forced migration. So I was documenting the exact experiences that these refugee women were going through. So as I document, I passed through a house. There was an older woman that was living there. She would never speak to anybody. She would just come and sit outside. So I passed through her house. Nobody introduced me to her. Nobody would say hello to her. She was just sitting outside. So I decided to sit with her. I felt she was intriguing me somehow. So I sat with her the whole day. She did not talk to me. She did not say hello to me. She just sat there quiet. And then when the sun goes down, she will enter. She entered the house. The second day, I returned. I found her outside as well. I sat outside with her. And then around like 11, she spoke, said, "Do you drink tea?" I said, "Yes." Oh, and she spoke to me in my own language. And I was like, "Oh, that's nice. She's Burundian." And then she was like, "Okay, let me make you something." She brought me tea. And then she asked me, "Did you know my daughter?" I said, "No." And then she said, "Let me tell you what happened to my daughter." She told me how when the political crisis started, the police raided her home and took her 15-year-old. And while they took her, they raped the mother in front of the daughter and then disappeared. 2 days later, she found the daughter in the street, her body parts apart. She took her body, cleaned her kid, and buried her. And she left for the refugee camp, trying to save her life. And since that day, she has never spoken about that particular story. All she does is come outside and sit. As she was narrating the story, I was crying, but no tears were coming from her face. She was telling me the story as if she has read it somewhere. And that broke my heart entirely. And then after she kept quiet, the sun goes down, she left. The third day I returned, I went to sit with her. But also I returned because of, I don't know, I was feeling bad that she was sitting alone. When she saw me, there's one thing she told me. She said, "Nobody ever comes to sit with me again after hearing my story." That is the reality of being a refugee. And nobody ever comes back to you after they handed you the small help that they think you need. Nobody ever comes to you to hold your hand and tell you it's okay. You know, it hurts to live on token food. These are people who deserve housing, people who have dreams, people who even before political crisis, economic crisis, or climate change started in their country, they had lives, you understand? But all of a sudden, everything changed. Now they're living at the mercy of token food. They're living hoping that one day somebody will come and give them a life. And for her to tell me that nobody ever come and sit with me after hearing my story, it breaks my heart, because for some, it's just a story to hear and you move on with your life. Nobody ever comes back to them. So I think for me, all the time that I feel discouraged, because it's a lot, and because also refugee work in most of the East African countries, it's underfunded. So most of community organizations don't do the work, don't do much because they don't have funds. Like I could imagine most of the things that we do are crowdfunding, like reaching out to people in the community on how they can really support us or be part of the work that we're doing. So most get discouraged, but also the trauma and the pain is too much. So most people run away, and it's understandable. But also I think on how most of survival for women has to be collective, you know, that
absolutely.
Now the violence that women and girls go through alone. Like you need a community to survive, and refugee women and girls need a community to survive. Like now I think about Rwanda has received a lot of Afghan women now, and I can imagine how much it means for them to have a community that actually cares and is interested for them to like strive and continue to have a life.
Thank you, Jijikael. How about you, Romy?
I wanted to respond to a few things that you said, Jidika, in terms of the story. I think that's something that I find a lot in my work when it comes to trauma. That one of the main things I see over and over again is when somebody is traumatized, when they're recounting their story, it's always as if they're recounting it as if it happened to someone else. And that's a survival mechanism that our body adopts to keep us safe. And there is something here about witnessing that's really, really powerful. And it's reminding me of, in the work that we do with asylum seekers, there's something that I've started noticing in the group that I work in, is that it gets to a point where we start getting internalized dehumanization and internalized racism. And I think it's important that I name that when working with asylum seekers, there is a difference. Seekers are treated, the darker skinned you are, the less rights you are given. So I think it's important that we address the racial element here as well, that you named earlier, Judika, when you were speaking, because I don't think that's spoken about enough, and I think it needs to be, because lighter skinned asylum seekers are treated better than darker skinned asylum seekers as well. And there's something that I see happen over time in working in this field, which is that, you know, people start internalizing the way the system treats them as maybe I am less than. That worthlessness with that token, being given tokens for food, sitting outside and not having somebody come back to witness your story, as human beings, the questioning starts being, maybe I'm not as worthy. And that is the work that I do when I work with RTI. A lot of the work that we do is we work on that internalized dehumanization. We work on the internalized racism, and specifically on acts of resistance, those small acts of resistance that we can empower our clients to go and do. For example, there's this one Cameroonian asylum seeker who works in Greece who was given less money than the Greek workers because he's Black. That's literally what he was told, right? So his act of resistance was saying, well, then I'm not gonna do this job again because I deserve to be paid as equal to someone else. And now it's about supporting him to go and find a job where he will be paid equally to other people. But that was a big dilemma for him because he needed the money. So it's constantly, in this field, how do we sit and bear witness to this pain, but also, as a therapist, one of the biggest parts of my work is challenging the internal narrative that starts happening as a result of the external and the way the system treats asylum seekers and refugees. So that's a really beautiful story, Jiti Kayel, about coming back to her, right? Going back and being like, I'm here to witness your story. And the group that, which is with male asylum seekers that we do, run by two women, Gabriella Brent and I, for RTI, was a group that it was really interesting starting it because it's working with male asylum seekers. And we asked them to find a private space, and many of them were in camps in Greece. And they said, that's going to be impossible. How are we going to find a private space for an hour and a half to do online therapy? And interestingly, they did, and they have. They found a way to negotiate space for themselves. And this group has been going on for about a year now and continues. So there is something there about when given community that is going to consistently come back to you, whether it's with women that, collective healing, we can only heal in community. Asylum seekers often migrate in community. There is something about that movement that needs to happen. But that internalized dehumanization and internalized racism, I thought was very important to talk about because that for me is the most powerful part of therapy in this field, challenging that internal narrative because nobody can own how, what goes on in your body after an incident. And I think the work with trauma is about challenging that and challenging the system at the same time.
Thank you both so much for the beautiful stories that you just shared with us and all the work that you do around this very important topic of the refugee crisis, women's rights. There's a beautiful quote that says that women are the light of the place. And I feel like you're bringing a lot of light into the spaces that you're in and the countries that you work in and the topics that you're approaching. Thank you so much for participating this evening. And I wish you great courage and great luck for the continuous work that you do.
We're gonna cover different topics, and for that I call first Cressy Westling, who's the co-founder of Elvis and Cressy. She's also a Cartier Women's Initiative Fellow from 2011, and her topic is definitely waste. This is the crisis she's trying to manage. Hi, Cressy.
Hi.
We also have Ana Luisa Becerra. She's the CEO of Safe Drinking Water, and the crisis she's trying to solve is definitely the one about water and access to water. Hi, Ana Luisa.
Hi,
And then we have also Celine Yigit-Bassi, founder and CEO of Goodstead. And her fight is more about social impact and how to gather forces to have a bigger impact. Hello. So very, very happy to have you here because it's always a privilege to have such a selection of great change makers. And so I would like to start with you, Cressy. So about waste, how did you happen to finally give a purpose to in your life, to fight the waste and the, let's say, the society of disposable?
I think sort of my journey with waste started a very long time ago. I was often going to the dump with my dad on a Saturday, and I grew up in Western Canada, so miles and miles and miles and thousands of miles from the sea. But the dump was the only place where there was seagulls, which I found really fascinating. And I've always retained that fascination. In the last 2 to 3 generations, we've invented waste. Our great-great-grandparents didn't really produce any. So this disposable culture is a relatively new phenomenon. And I'm always wondering, how did we get there? How can we get away from here? And one of, my key response to it, and why I started the business that I have back in 2005, was to just point out to people that even materials that were so unloved and seemed so valueless could be turned into really cherishable, durable, long-lasting items, and could do a lot of good, could create wonderful jobs. 50% of our profits go to charity. There's a whole host of wonderful ethical things that we do. And we do all of that with waste. And the idea is really to help foster cultural change.
Amazing. And so can you tell a bit more about where concretely you're doing? I believe this is a lot to see with firemen. It's just the teaser. So
Yes.
You can go on.
So we started, when I first moved to the UK, I did lots of research into the waste here, and I discovered there was 100 million tons going to landfill. And this was an inconceivable amount to me. So I thought, I've got to go and see what that looks like. So I spent about 4 months touring various landfill sites in the UK. And that's when I saw a fire hose. Now, a fire hose gets decommissioned when it becomes 25 years old, and then it starts to fail its health and safety test, or if it's too damaged to repair. But it's still this insanely durable material that is actually very similar to a material used by a couple of French luxury brands. And I thought, why should we be generating new high-grade synthetic rubber like this, particularly for the luxury industry, when decommissioned fire hoses are everywhere? So the business was set up specifically to rescue London's damaged decommissioned fire hoses. We started with belts. We moved on to bags, wallets, and accessories. And since day one, 50% of the profits have gone to the firefighters' charity.
That's fantastic. And I think that one of the things that inspires me most in what you're doing, actually, because when I discovered what you were doing, I was saying, wow, what's amazing is that your ambition and vision are super large, meaning that, for example, I read somewhere that now that you are covering like all the hose pipes in London, you have now other goals to add on other materials, maybe to go towards the same path.
Yes.
There is this in terms of ambition and also in terms of vision. I think that you apply also in your everyday life this theory about this fight against the disposable and bring back more to nature. Those 2 points.
Yes. So I think the really fascinating thing, listening to this, who has an idea that they might want to be an entrepreneur, the really interesting thing that I've always loved about business is that if you can make enough money to keep the doors open, then you can do pretty much whatever you want. And no one tells you to stop doing it. So we started with fire hose. We now rescue 15 different materials. We collect the waste leather from Burberry. We collect printing blankets from the printing industry. We collect coffee sacks, failed parachute panels. Just a huge list of materials. And each one of them has required a lot of R&D to transform into something amazing. And each material involves a charitable partnership. So from our leather rescue project, we create scholarships for women to train as solar engineers. And that's been a hugely successful project for us and for the women involved. But the mission obviously expands. We started this 16 years ago, and every success that we had made us feel two things. One, that the luxury industry still represents a structural failure to me, because it's supposed to be about creativity, and actually it's involved in the destruction of the environment and the degradation of its people. If we look through the supply chains, through the pace and the processes that it uses. And we thought, rather, of course we're focusing on our raw materials, but actually the focus is much wider. It's on changing the industry. It's on, being very vocal about being a social enterprise, about being a B Corp, about being the kind of business that puts impact, people, and planet above profit. We don't celebrate profit. When people ask me what my turnover is, I will always tell them in tons of houses or in charitable donations, because I think we need a cultural change in order to start redefining what success is. Because to me, money is relatively empty. It's just a grease in the wheels to keep you going. And then, you mentioned the farm. Certainly, I don't think there's probably everyone who's listening is aware of these two massive existential threats that we face as a civilization, and that's climate change and biodiversity loss. And, there are some typical corporate responses to that, which are, well, let's have a sustainability team and let's reduce our impact. Well, or let's offset our CO2. And Elvis and I always take a direct hands-on approach. So over the course of pandemic, we moved our entire operation to a farm, and we've started a regenerative agriculture project. The idea for us is for the business to be a net regenerative business, a net giver to biodiversity. We've completely changed the landscape here to make it a biodiversity hotspot. And also through regenerative agricultural practices, to rebuild soil health and to sequester carbon into the soil. So we're not offsetting we're not asking anyone to do this work on our behalf. Literally, we're going to be, us and our team are out in the field doing it. And I think a lot of businesses, if they want to truly have an impact on climate change, have to start transitioning their business models into being very solution focused, particularly with regards to climate change and biodiversity loss.
Yeah, perfect transition. To be solution focused, this is exactly what we're trying to be right now in this session. And for the next topic, I'd like to travel to Brazil. And so I'd like to have Ana Luisa with us here. Hi, Ana Luisa. So can you tell us a bit more about you sometimes, I read sometimes that you are the girl who wanted to solve the water problem in the world. That's super ambitious, and at the same time I think that ambition is key in everything we want to solve if we want to manage to get to somewhere. So Ana Luisa, can you tell us a bit more?
Started saying that to dream big and to dream small, we spend the same amount of energy and thinking. So for us in STW, we know that water problem is a really big challenge, and not stand.
Yeah, I hear you back. That's good.
You are. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's good.
Oh, so for us, we right now we are still small. We have been impacting about 13,000 people in Brazil, but the water and sanitation issue affects more than 2 billion people. So we still have a very, very long journey. And with that, our ambition is not only to grow and impact, but to inspire more people, more companies, more organizations to work in sanitation sector, so we can have very scalable solutions implementing and changing the lives of those who need it the most. Water access is a human right, and we know that when it's not a reality, when it's scarce and it's not safe to drink, it can generate a lot of problems, mainly talking about health, education, and it affects mainly the women's, because usually in countries that has this issue, the women's, the mothers are the responsible to get water and to treat and to while they are sick. So we have a lot of problems because of this. And when we can solve it through innovative, sustainable solutions, such as the ones that we work in SCW. For example, we have Aqualuz, technology that only uses some energy to clean the water and lasts for 20 years. So we have this huge impact, very durable and sustainable, talking about environmental also, for a problem that affects millions of people worldwide. That's our main approach, but for the future, we hope to implement a lot of other technology. For example, blockchain. We are projecting a social token to help the scale not only of our solutions, but solutions that can address the water issue very effective. And for now, well, the problem that they are facing is the low amount of opportunities, finance for them to be able to reach those who needed the water and sanitation.
Is that you are working on the solution and at the same time on inspiration. You mentioned that you wanted to inspire people to solve this issue. One of the things that I think are truly inspiring in your journey is that at age 21, you've been named a Young Champion of the Earth by the United Nations. How did that felt? What came after that?
So I would say where we were before the prize and where we are after the prize. Because before receiving this international recognition that is really huge, we were trying to have partners, we were trying to have funding to develop our technology, and no one were believing in our petition. For then, I was just a small girl, a young girl, trying to play of scientist. I wasn't taken seriously. After this important recognition, a lot of things changed a lot. I would say that doors that we were trying to open suddenly opened for us after this UN recognition. So it's something that we right now we have this 13,000 of people impacted just because we got an international recognition, and suddenly people start to believe that what we were doing was serious and could save and help a lot of people, not only in Brazil, but around the world.
Thanks for this great explanation of how that brought a lot of traction to what you're doing. Now I'm going to turn towards Celine. Celine, founder and CEO of Goodstead. So here we are more about how to create bigger social impact by inspiring other people to get into action. Can you tell us a bit more about Goodstead?
And it's essentially, you can think of it as a social network for collaborating to create a better world. So it's open for individuals to join for free, and anyone leading a nonprofit or an impact startup can join for free as well to ask for support. And what's interesting is that we decided to build Goodstead as a software solution to make it easy for program managers to also engage their communities and report on their engagement and impact. This also helps us make the platform financially sustainable and reach larger communities of individuals and projects. So one use case which we're focusing on is actually helping companies who need a solution for engaging their employees in their social purpose. And we do this by simply helping them connect their employees with opportunities for volunteering and helping to keep track of the engagement and impact. And for this, we focus on skill volunteering. For example, if you're great at marketing or comms, you can use this skill to help a nonprofit with their comms campaign. And of course, there are other opportunities as well on the platform. It depends on which organizations or projects are registered and engaging. And for example, last year we had an opportunity posted to gather supporters for writing letters to the elderly to help them feel less isolated during COVID lockdown, which was great. And I won't go into more detail about the other use cases, but as mentioned, we also work with communities and organizations who already have access to beneficiaries and supporters. We simply help reduce the administrative burden of tracking engagement and reporting on impact. Our platform's in beta version right now. We launched it last year, but we already have clients, partners, and over 2,000 members using the platform. So yeah, finally, to summarize, we're on a mission to create a multi-stakeholder platform where every member of society can easily take part in social and environmental progress. And we're currently looking to connect with companies who are happy to offer their employees days off to volunteer and take part in causes. So if you're one of them, please get in touch.
So if I make it short, you are trying to solve the issue of waste of talent somewhere, I would say. I just have a data. I have a data which is that around 80% of people would like to have an impact and get involved in something socially or environmentally oriented, but only between 10 to 20% of people really do something. How, with Goodstead, you managed to convince people to get part to change?
Yeah, so that's a stat that we also talk about quite a lot. There's a huge kind of talent pool that are ingrained in companies, and what we do is we help employees in companies as well as other individuals in communities to easily get onto the platform, have their profiles up there, tell us on their profiles what they're interested in and what their skills are. And then we connect them with exciting and inspiring impact startups, founders of impact startups, and nonprofits who are really looking for support to progress with their challenges. And we easily connect them on the platform. It acts a bit like a social network, but we have all the processes in place. So when you support an opportunity on the platform, you immediately get connected to the founder, and then you give your support, and at the end you get a chance to exchange recommendation and feedback, and all of this gets collated on the feed of the platform, and it motivates other people to take part. So it's all about creating that transparency and exposure and showing the collective impact that we can create if we all take part in causes and share our skills.
Oh, that's definitely exciting. For the last 3 minutes of this panel, I would like just to get back to each one of you for a question and around 1 minute each one. My question is, what would be the advice you could give to the would-be change makers that are listening to us? Tracy, maybe to start with it.
Are focused on solutions because we love the problems that we've chosen to solve. So I recommend you read through the UN SDGs and you sort of examine your heart and you look at which one of these problems could you dedicate your life to, and which, maybe more importantly, which one of these problems is matched to your skill set. Which one do you think is that you know a lot about, you can learn a lot about? Because if you're married to the problem, you're going to keep adapting the solution and you're going to stay resilient. It's certainly all of the entrepreneurs that I know in the impact space who have stuck around are the ones who love their problems.
Oh, thanks. Ana Luisa?
And I completely agree with Chris. And to add, I would say that it's important to start with what you have. You don't need to start complex. You don't need to, of course, we are going to dream big. We are going to imagine a lot of fantastic things, but we need to make sure that we can work with what we have. if we just have like 100 euros or dollar to start, we need to make something to start with that, and then grow and collect partner, grow a network to help you achieve your goal and mainly solve your problem.
Thanks, Ana Luisa. And maybe Celine for the closing word.
Perfect. I would say that this is the time to push to drive action for causes you really care about. And if you have an idea for an initiative, then try to pilot it on a small scale and look to partner with others to see how you can create the biggest impact. And if you don't have an idea, but if you're really keen to use your skills to progress a specific cause, then there are actually many nonprofits and impact startups out there who would immensely benefit from your input. And finally, be transparent in what you want to achieve and be yourself. And this would be one of the biggest recommendations I could give, actually. Being yourself and being open helps build strong and long-term relationships, which lead to meaningful collaboration and helps amplify your voice.
Being yourself. Well, thanks to the three of you for this discussion that was totally energizing. Here at ChangeNOW, we see a lot of change makers, but it's always super energizing to have this kind of discussion. So thank you very much. Now we're getting to the end of this evening together, and I wanted to say a few words of thank you and a few closing words. First of all, I wanted to to say thank you to all the speakers who participated here today. Thank you to Nora from Who Cares, who moderated the sessions just earlier. Thank you to the technical team here. You don't see them, but thank you to the technical team. Special thanks to La Caserne, Maëva Bessis from La Caserne, who hosted us here when we had to change plans. And thank you to the ChangeNOW team, who made a great and fantastic job in gathering such amazing speakers tonight. Also, I would like to underline the value of collaboration. And that's why I want also to give a warm thanks to our partners, Cartier Women Initiative, UN Women, He4She, One Young World, Women in Tech, and UNHCR. It's only because we are doing all these together, the support you bring to this program, that we manage to deliver this kind of quality of content. So thank you. Now the second edition of the Women for Change program is launched. Many other rendezvous will come later in the year in our relentless determination to put light and help those who are really changing the world. To finish, I take also this opportunity to announce the next edition of ChangeNOW, our global summit. It will take place in May, from the 19th to the 21st of May 2022, in a renewed format, in person, on the Champ de Mars, going from the Grand Palais Éphémère to the first floor of the Eiffel Tower. So we expect you there if you want to be part of this huge community of change makers. The program will have a lot of surprises, an extended program with this multi-site format. And as a closing word, I would like to share something that also struck me. Nora told something about light earlier. And I believe that the different change makers we've seen tonight are like candles that are some light, showing that light prevails on darkness. And I believe that every one of us here, by being more caring, by being more linked to nature and to the other, is called to be somewhere light. And I just want to leave you with this idea. And I say thank you very much for listening to us, for watching us, and see you soon.